So, picture this. You're in the middle of a war, you're winning, and then you just stop. Why? Well, today we're diving into the 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War and a really mysterious 12-day halt in the fighting, a pause that, on the surface, looked like a huge mistake, but was actually a stroke of geopolitical genius. Okay, let's set the scene. It's November 1971. The Allied forces of India and the Bangladeshi Mukti Bahini have just scored a huge victory. An Indian commander on the ground, Brigadier Mehta, is thinking, one more push, and this whole thing is over. They had all the momentum. But that order to advance? It never came. Instead, for 12 long days, the main Indian offensive just went quiet. Everything stopped. And this strategic pause has fascinated historians for decades. I mean, why would a winning army suddenly slam on the brakes? Let's break down this timeline, because this is where it gets really interesting. The joint offensive kicks off on November 21st, but it's immediately followed by this strange 12-day pause. Then boom, on December 3rd, it explodes into a full-scale war. Understanding this sequence is the key to seeing how this war was won, not just on the battlefield, but really on the world stage. So, where do we find the first piece of this puzzle? Well, it's not in military tactics. It's on the global chessboard of Cold War politics. This was India's game. And they weren't just fighting a war. They were playing a super delicate game of international diplomacy. And this is where you see this huge gap between what India was saying out loud and what was really going on behind the scenes. Publicly, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was downplaying everything, calling the victory a purely local incident. But privately, the goal was so much bigger: to bait Pakistan into making the first move, so India would look like the defender, not the aggressor. The thing is, India could absolutely afford to play this waiting game. They were holding all the cards, really. First, the monsoon season was over, so the ground was perfect for their tanks. Second, the Himalayan passes were snowed in, which blocked any chance of China jumping in to help Pakistan. And most importantly, they had a powerful new ally. Yeah, this was the ace up their sleeve, the brand new Indo-Soviet treaty. It was basically a diplomatic shield. It promised that if anyone attacked India, the Soviet Union would have their back. And that gave India all the confidence it needed to just wait. Over at the United Nations Security Council, that diplomatic shield looked a lot like this. The number 3. This stands for 3 absolutely crucial vetoes from the Soviet Union. You had all these world powers scrambling, trying to force an immediate ceasefire. But every single time they tried to pass a resolution, the Soviets blocked it. This gridlock was exactly what India wanted. It completely paralyzed the international community and bought the Indian military precious time to finish the job on their own terms. The whole situation became so obvious that one frustrated Saudi diplomat just nailed it. He perfectly captured how powerless the UN was, comparing their useless resolutions to autumn leaves being wafted in the council. Okay, so you have India playing this incredible, patient game of 4D chess. Meanwhile, Pakistan was about to walk straight into their trap. To get why Pakistan did what they did, you have to understand their #1 military rule. For decades, their entire strategy was built on one single belief: if you get hit hard in the east, you have to respond with a massive strike in the west. And that's exactly what happened. On December 3rd, after those 12 days of simmering tension, Pakistan's leaders followed the playbook. They launched a wave of preemptive airstrikes against India in the west, officially starting the war. They walked right into it. And bam! That was it. That was the geopolitical gift India had been patiently waiting for. Pakistan was now officially the aggressor. The fight wasn't a regional uprising anymore. It was a full-blown war, and India suddenly had the moral high ground on the world stage. But here's the thing. There's another really important part of this story that often gets left out. For the people of Bangladesh, the Mukti Bahini freedom fighters, there was no pause. Not at all. Their war had been raging for 9 long months. And this chart? It shows it all. Long before India's big offensive in November, the Mukti Bahini were fighting an increasingly intense guerrilla war. Look how their operations ramped up through 1971, causing real damage to Pakistani forces. For them, this wasn't the start of a war, it was just the continuation of their struggle. And right in the middle of all this, Bangladesh's wartime government made an absolutely brilliant political move. On November 22nd, the day after the joint offensive began, they issued this directive:
And you have to look at the specific language here. Bangladesh is the host country. India's army, they're the supporting forces.
See, this wasn't just bureaucratic paperwork. This was a powerful statement. It was a declaration of sovereignty. It created a legal framework that made sure history would remember this not as an Indian invasion, but as a Bangladeshi liberation that was supported by an ally. It was all about owning their own freedom.
Okay, so let's put all the pieces of this puzzle together. We've got India's patient strategy, Pakistan's fateful mistake, and Bangladesh's powerful assertion of its own sovereignty. Now we can finally solve the mystery of this so-called strange pause.
So that strange pause? It wasn't strange at all. It was just a complex moment that looked completely different depending on who you were. For India, it was a perfectly laid trap. For Pakistan, it was an act of aggression that they had to respond to. And for Bangladesh, it was just the next phase of a struggle they'd been fighting for 9 long months.
You know, it all comes back to that famous saying from the military theorist Karl von Clausewitz: war is just politics, but with fighting. The battles on the ground were just an extension of the political and diplomatic games being played all around the world. The real takeaway here is that India's victory was secured not just with tanks and fighter jets, but with incredible patience, sharp diplomacy, and a deep understanding of global politics. That 12-day pause wasn't hesitation. It was the chess move that checkmated Pakistan before the final battle even started. And that leaves us with a question to think about, one that's just as relevant today as it was back then. In any conflict, what's really more powerful? The weapons you can see, or the unseen strategy that's guiding them? Thanks for joining us.